So muscle is going to be important. But at the same time, we're going to go over a couple different things as well as far as skeletons. And I'll show you why a skeleton is so important. Because muscle is obviously an important trait because we're eating them. But at the same time, in the show ring, there's going to be a lot of sheep that have muscle. Once you go to your county fair, there's going to be a lot of sheep that have an abundance of muscle. And so you have to stand out somehow. And so making them good built and correct in terms of their skeleton is going to be very, very important. And so we'll just go right in first and foremost. I'm going to lay out kind of some priorities to look for in these baby sheep. Okay, hold on 1 second. Somebody drive. Oh.
Why don't you drive? Okay.
I apologize for that, folks. I'm having somebody drive here real quick. Again, kind of an unorthodox lecture here. But, so the first and foremost priority, once we start talking about selecting these baby sheep, and I'm going to outline a couple different priorities that you can always remember when you're picking out your new projects, but rib shape is going to be one of the first priorities that I will tell you in selecting these babies, okay? And so I'm going to share a picture here to you. I'm actually going to share my screen. Uh-oh. Okay. Hey, Amber?
Yeah.
Are you by chance able to share those pictures?
Yeah.
For some reason, mine aren't coming up. I thought I was going to be able to do it.
Yep.
There's a picture of a sheep. It looks like kind of a little curve right on his forerib.
Yeah. Let me find them. I saved them here.
You can get one. That one's here.
Which one did you say?
It should be, there should be a one up on the corner. There should be a little curve right on the sheep's like forerib right in. There we go. Yep. Rib shape is very, very important. And so what I mean by that, if you look right at sheep's forerib, right where that first circle is up close by his neck, forerib shape is very, very important. And the primary purpose behind that is when we make a rib cage perfectly round, that's the first thing that I want you guys to look for in these babies, because that sets you up to have more mass over the top side of your sheep. Because when you make a rib cage round, that muscle over their top has to sit on something. And so it sits on top of their rib. And so when you make it round, you give that muscle a place to sit up on top of. And so when we can make it wider than it is deep, that's how we become successful in making these sheep handle correctly and having enough muscle over the top side of their skeleton to compete. And so forerib shape, even though that's very, very, it seems very minute and very little, that isn't so incredibly important. My family, we raise sheep. We raise a few, and we've fed a bunch in our lifetime, and that is one of the very, very first things that we look for when we're picking out babies. And so the other thing, while we're on this sheep and while we're kind of talking about muscle, that I want you to notice is look at the shape of that sheep's muscle. Right there back over his rump, you can see that sheep has a lot of turn there. I almost call it a bubble butt. He's got a bubble butt, all right? And so that's something that's very, very important in understanding these baby sheep, because as big sheep at our county fair, we want the turn through their lower leg. Essentially, again, we want a bubble butt. What that shows to a judge is that sheep has enough muscle and enough muscle shape. And so when we get that as babies, we get that as baby lambs, that muscle shape will stick with them, or at least it should if you have a proper exercise program and a proper feeding program. And so that's the picture that I wanted to show you there. Amber, actually, if you'd scroll to the number 2 picture now, I think there should be one with a 2 on it. Maybe not.
A 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Go ahead and click on 3, actually. The more I think about it, I think I actually didn't send you 2, which is okay. All right, so we've talked about kind of some rib shape and muscle shape. I'm going to come back to muscle shape here in a little bit. But rib shape is very important. That's making their rib a perfect circle. So now on this sheep, I wanted to show you a picture of him without lines on him first and foremost. This goes back into making them built correctly. All right, that's a good picture of a little sheep. Okay, that sheep has some muscle. You can tell that sheep's rib is shaped correctly. Now, Amber, if you'd actually scroll the one with a 4 on it, it's that same sheep. I'm just going to draw some lines on him now. There we go. Okay, so you'll notice that I've drawn a couple lines, and it looks like 45-degree angles, and that's how we want their skeleton to be constructed, okay? Up through his shoulder, you can see from the top of his shoulder to the bottom of his shoulder, we want that to be a 45-degree angle. That allows that sheep to get out and move and flex, okay? Same thing in their hip. From their dock up by their tail head there, down to their stifle joint, which is right kind of on the back side of their flank. You can kind of see where the corner of that that angle that I put together there, that's their stifle joint. From the top of their hip to their stifle joint, from the top of their shoulder to the bottom of their shoulder, we need that to be a 45-degree angle. And then it needs to come back in the same kind of direction that sheep's hind leg does, okay? That not only does it look attractive, not only does it look good, but on top of that, what that does is that allows that sheep to function better. That allows that sheep to flex and stay comfortable when he moves, okay? And the further that we get in the show industry, kind of a problem that the show sheep industry got into is we got them really wide, really, really stout, but we forgot about structural correctness. And so now at this point, we're getting a lot better at that. And you'll notice one thing that I encourage you to look for in these babies is look at the angularity of their shoulder and their hip, but also make sure that their top lines stay level in them when they walk. Watch these sheep walk when you're going out and selecting your babies, because they need to keep their top line level in them. And the reason that is important is because if either end, either their hip or their shoulder are too straight, their skeleton has to give somewhere in order to move. And that's right in their spine. And so their spine will actually pull up in them, okay? Again, that makes it sound kind of severe, but just from a structural correctness standpoint, their spine needs to stay level in them. And when their spine stays right, generally both ends of their skeleton are made correctly, okay? And so that is something that's very, very important. While we're on this picture, another thing that I think this sheep does very, very well is if you look from the top of his shoulder to the bottom of his shoulder, that is very, very shallow. We want that shallow. Sheep and goats are about the only two species where shallow is actually a good thing. And the primary purpose behind that is if you guys have never eaten sheep fat, if you've never eaten lamb fat, I encourage you to do so one time, and you will realize that lamb fat doesn't taste very good. And so that's why we want to keep these sheep relatively trim. And so, but we can give the judge a little bit of you can tell a fat sheep from a trim sheep, even just from the side. And so when we make these sheep shallow, they look trim. And then so from the top of their shoulder to the base of their shoulder should be as shallow as possible. Then their chest stays shallow. And from their back, from their chest back into their flank, they should get deeper. I would equate how we want sheep and goats to be built. We kind of want them to be like a doorstop, if you will. From the side, the shallowest point on them needs to be up through their shoulder and their chest, and then they need to get deeper all the way back. Okay, that sheep does that very well. That is a good, balanced, very attractive sheep. And Amber, actually, if you'd go back to that last picture. So now I'm going to take the lines off him, and hopefully you can even see his shoulder just a little bit better, his shoulder and his chest. That sheep is very, very good in that regard. We also want them to be shaped, and I don't really have a great picture of this, but we also want them to be shaped like a doorstop over their top as well. If you can get over the top of these sheep, the narrowest point on them should be up through their shoulder, and then they should get progressively wider back into their hip and their tail head, okay? And the reason behind that is, one, it helps the sheep balance a lot better, and then two, what that does is, if you think about where high price cuts are in these market lambs, I always like to bring it back to a realistic perspective, a market perspective. We have more high price cuts back in through their rack, loin, and leg. And so we want more weight being dispersed towards the back side of their build, if that makes sense, okay? And so I've kind of talked about rib shape to this point. I talked about muscle shape, okay? And I'm going to come back to muscle shape here in just a second as well once we talk about handle. But just talking about looking at sheep from the outside, we've also kind of talked about build. We want them to be shallow chested and shallow shouldered, and then get progressively deeper back into their flank. And then the same thing over their top. They need to be the narrowest at their shoulder and get wider back into their hip, okay? That's all kind of talking about build and quality. And so now going back to the muscle shape side of things, the reason muscle shape is important, it's important to handle your projects before you buy them, okay? And these online sales are great. I bought a lot of sheep on online sales, but what I would encourage you all to do, and I cannot stress this enough, make sure you look at these sheep before you buy them. That's something that's very, very important in my opinion, okay? Once again, because when you go and handle these sheep, it's very important. Because from a judge's perspective, it's important for these sheep to handle correctly with some muscle shape. They need to be trim. They need to be square and fresh handling, okay? And we can kind of talk about later some nutritional stuff to help these sheep become fresh, if you will, and get the right kind of handle on them from a nutrition standpoint. But when you're selecting them as babies, they need to have a big stand-up rack. And their rack muscle is right in behind their shoulder, okay? And they need to be big and square all the way back into their loin. And if you're questioning where their loin is, their loin, if you go and handle, it's from their last rib back to the front side of their pelvis. We call that a hook bone, okay? And you can kind of see it in this sheep here in the picture that we've got, right where you can almost see kind of that little dip right in the front side of his leg, or right in the front side of his hip there. That's where his hook bone is, and then you can handle with your fingers back up to the front, or his last rib, and that's the loin muscle. And so we want that to be big and stand up and square, okay? It should handle like a tabletop. If you feel that you can eat dinner on your sheep's back, then it's probably stout enough, all right? And so that's very important from a handle perspective. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that because that just kind of comes with some time. It's hard for me to describe over a phone, but making sure that their top shape stands up in them and it feels hard like muscle, then it's probably okay. So at this point, we've talked about muscle shape from the outside, and then once we get in and handle, we've talked about making these sheep built correctly to walk right, and then making them look attractive, okay? And then as well, we've talked about rib shape. And so now, actually, if Amber, if you'd go to, I believe it's picture 5, I'm going to kind of talk about some problems here real quick. Is there a 6? Would you mind scrolling to 6 real quick? There should be a picture without lines on it of this sheep. Okay, so let's talk about some problems. This is a sheep that, again, if this sheep ever were to show up to a show that I was judging at a county fair, that's a pretty nice sheep, but we can pick some holes in, okay? He's pretty easy to pick some holes in. That sheep, I'm going to show you, I want to show you without lines, and then I'm going to show you with the lines to show you exactly where I'm looking at. But that sheep is too straight shouldered. He's too deep in his chest in relation to his flank. He's tighter up in through his flank than he is his chest, okay? And so from a skeleton standpoint, that's where that sheep needs changed. And so now, actually, Amber, if you go back to 5 here. There we go. So you can look from the top of his shoulder to the base of his shoulder. That is too much of a vertical line. Same thing in his hip there. That's too much of a vertical line. We need to lay him back in his shoulder angle in order to make that sheep balance better. And then as well, you can tell right there in his chest, he is shallower in his chest than he is, or he is shallower in his flank than he is in his chest. And so once again, that doesn't help that sheep proportion out and balance good enough. And so that would be my issue there. Does anybody have any questions on what I'm looking at there? That sheep has a lot of muscle shape. Just from a skeleton standpoint, he's not quite built as good. And again, if you have any questions, just type it right there in the chat box. And so now, actually, Amber, if you go to, I believe it's 7. Okay. We've got a little bit of a different breed here. This is a Dorset. But so this is a sheep that, for this one's breed, for the Dorsets, for those of you that show in a white face division, that sheep's got a bunch of muscle. That sheep is very, very powerful. You can tell right through the base, right through the base of his leg. He's got that bubble butt that I was talking about earlier. You can even tell just through the shadows that sheep has some rib shape. My biggest issue with that guy is the set of his hind leg isn't very attractive. And so, Amber, if you'd scroll to 8, please. That sheep has far too much set to his hind leg. If you kind of compare him back to those pictures that I was showing earlier, he isn't near as attractive. He sets down too far on his hind leg. And so the posture of a hind leg is very important to show judges. It makes you stand out. And like we talked about earlier, you can be very muscular and be a very good carcass sheep, but there's going to be a lot of muscular, good carcass sheep at a lot of these shows. And so that's why you have to be built good enough and have enough unique pieces from an attractiveness standpoint in order to stand out, to win a show or win a class or win a division for that matter. You'll often hear judges talk about that, the sheep in third could honestly be the heaviest muscled, but he's not built good enough. That's because the two that just beat him might have just as much muscle or slightly less, but they're built more correct. And so if they are acceptable from a carcass standpoint, then more emphasis can be placed on build. And that's what I would pick that sheep apart for if we were to have that sheep at a show. All right, is the sense that he has too much set to his hind leg. It throws off that sheep's balance. All right. The other thing that I'm going to talk about real quick is making sure, going back to just the basics thing, where we're at in the sheep world right now is it's kind of hard to have a sheep that's too big. All right. Now, once you start pushing up at an endpoint, once you start pushing up into the 160s, 170s, we're probably starting to push a little too big. But when you start thinking about what weight you want to buy these sheep at right now, if you're looking at online sales or you're going to sheep sales, I know in the state of Wyoming right now, we've got the Casper sale coming up here pretty quick. There's going to be a lot of sheep sales coming up here within a pretty soon amount of time. Those sheep need to be about, they should probably be pushing right about 70 to 80 pounds. And then once you tag in, I know a lot of tag-ins are right there about end of May, 1st of June. I think Albany County, my brother's county, is the 1st of June. And so once you go and tag in those sheep, most counties you have to weigh 100 pounds at county fair in order to make weight. I would honestly encourage you that your sheep should be relatively close to about pretty close to about 100 pounds by tag in. And so I would say about 70 to 80 pounds is what they need to weigh right about now. Probably about 65 to 70 at this moment in time. But and so good question that I just saw for an August fair. That's actually when Albany County Fair is. And so for our county fair, in order to get the sheep that we're gonna go play with, that we're gonna hopefully make a run at winning a county fair with, most of those sheep that we're gonna buy will be about will be about 70 to 75 pounds, because at the end of the day, I want those sheep to weigh about 145 to 150. And so I just got the question for a county fair in September. Those sheep, you can afford to be just a little smaller. Those can be, I think, even if you're buying a 65-pound sheep right about now, you're pretty fair. And so, yes, for a late July fair, probably a little heavier. Realistically, you can push these sheep pretty hard. If they've got an appetite, you can push them pretty hard. And so, yeah, a little heavier is just fine. To be honest with you, whenever I judge shows, I don't mind a little bigger sheep. And so weights can vary. But at the same time, I've also used little ones as well. And so the ideal endpoint is you need to be about a 140 to 145 is what I would say. 135 to 145, I think, is a fair weight range. And if you figure on them gaining about a half pound a day, sometimes you can push them up to about 0.6 of a pound to 0.7 of a pound a day. And so if you figure on them about that, you can kind of do the math backwards on what they need to weigh about now. So, but I would encourage you, if you have a sheep that weighs 100 pounds at tag ends, then you're probably right on track. Does anybody else have any questions? Well, we got a lot of bursts of questions there as far as weight is concerned. Does anybody else have any questions as far as that is, or in that regard? In that case, I'm going to kind of move on to talk about goats here real quick. Won't take, I'm going to be kind of repetitive on the goat side of things because, like I said earlier, it's pretty similar. And so, Amber, if you would scroll to, I believe, picture 9. Oh, there's 10. Perfect. If you'd actually go back to 10 real fast. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Now, I'm going to show you a good example of a prospect goat or a baby goat, and then I'll show you an example to kind of steer away from. That goat right there, is it realistic to buy one at that age that looks like that? Probably not. That goat actually right there sold for $13,000 as a baby. And so, again, definitely not expecting. I'm showing you this picture as an ideal. And so, Amber, if you'd scroll to 11 there. So kind of the same story as we talked about earlier. We want these goats to be built correctly. So you can see the little curve that I have there by his tail. I'm talking some muscle shape. Those goats need to have some muscle shape. They need to handle like sheep nowadays. Those goats need to have some top shape in them, okay? Much like sheep. That sheep is that goat is very, very shallow shouldered, shallow chested, very long necked, which is a good thing. And then that goat gets progressively deeper back to his flank. That one, you can all save that one as a picture of kind of an ideal baby goat to go purchase off of. Now, again, like I said, it's hard to build and hard to make goats that look like that. And so obviously you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit. But if you can select stuff to what you would deem an ideal, then that is how you become successful in this game. And that is a pretty ideal baby goat. Structurally, that goat is made very good in terms of hip and hind leg angle. Shoulder angle is in that goat is very, very good. Okay. Amber, if you'd scroll to the picture 12. There we go. Now this goat, a picture of another baby goat. This one we can pick some holes in this guy. This one is too deep there in his chest. He gets progressively deeper back to his flank, but his shoulder and his chest are far too deep. That goat doesn't have a whole lot of muscle shape either. If you go back, Amber, if you'd scroll to the next one, please. There we go. So you can see that first line that I have drawn up by his head. That's where I'm talking about that he's too deep there in his chest and his shoulder. And then back in through, that goat doesn't have the bubble butt that I was talking about earlier. That goat's too flat there through his leg. And also something that I haven't really talked about yet that actually plays a pretty decently big role when we start talking about the show ring, just because it helps animals balance so much better is foot and bone. That goat is pretty frail in terms of his legs, and so when I talk about bone, I'm talking about kind of their legs, and we want big legs in both sheep and goats. Okay, and that goat is pretty frail. That is one that we would deem frail, kind of tiny legs, and so that goat doesn't have a whole lot of muscle shape. He's pretty frail, and then pretty deep and kind of a little more average looking from the side. Okay, we need to make that goat a little more, I guess you could call it freaky looking, is kind of the common term that a lot of people use. That goat needs to be shallower and needs to have a lot more muscle shape in order to compete with a lot of goats that show today. All right. And so again, I don't want to get too repetitive on the sheep and the goat side of things. So if you have goat or sheep specific questions as far as selection, feel free to ask now. That's the best I can tell you as far as selection over the phone or over a computer screen, I guess. But again, I like to work off questions, and so if you guys have questions, go ahead and chat it. Also, what I will tell you, we can kind of talk about nutrition a little bit real fast while you guys think about questions as far as selection goes. And so nutritionally, I would, no matter where you buy your sheep from or your goat, regardless, how much? Oh, good question. I did not even think about answering that. How much should our goats weigh? Great question. So again, you can kind of start to figure on goats gaining between about 0.4 to 0.5 pounds a day. Once again, very, very similar to sheep. And so an ideal goat, again, we're kind of pushing to be a little bigger. An ideal goat will weigh between 75 and probably 95 pounds is kind of an ideal goat. And so you can kind of backtrack there. What I would tell you is, as per right now, your goat should probably weigh right around 40. I would probably say 40 pounds. If you can get a 40 pounder, 35 to 40 pounder right now, you're probably on track. Good. That's a very good question about how much our goats should weigh. But as far as nutrition, and again, stop me with questions if you have them. But as far as nutrition, what I would encourage you all to do, what I can do is actually send Amber a lot of the stuff that we feed and a lot of the stuff that my family has believed in and have seen that works. But what I would encourage you to do is, when you first get your new project home, ask the breeder that you got that sheep or goat from what they have fed and what they have found that works. We have found, we have certain breeders that we buy from and that we've had success feeding their livestock. And so our feed regimen works for the kind that we buy. And so, again, what I'd encourage you to do is ask your breeder what they like to feed and what has worked for them. And then you can go from there on kind of discovering what you like. And it'd be a whole lot easier. Like I said, I can just send you, I can send Amber and she can kind of disperse kind of a basic feeding program that we do. Oh, I missed that question. Excellent question. So as far as exercising, this can be kind of the same thing for sheep and goats. So as far as an exercise program, this is incredibly important to make sure that your livestock looks correct. And so exercise program, there's about 1 million different ways that you can go about it. What I would encourage you to do is make sure every day that they're doing something. Like our family, for a long while, we finally built a track, or we're going to build a track, I guess I should say. But what we've done is we actually run them just on the back of a truck. We start them out at about a half mile at just a little jog, almost or every day. And so that's what I'd encourage you to do, is make sure that your animals or your sheep or your goats are running pretty close to every day. Now, and we work them up to about 2 miles is what we do. Now, what I will also tell you is part of the other thing that we do is if you can get a cheap treadmill, and you got to be kind of careful with this because you can start to break down their pasterns a little bit. But if you can get a cheap treadmill at a garage sale or something like that, and rig it up to where those sheep can actually run on that treadmill backwards, sheep or goats, if you can rig it up to where they can run on it backwards and do it very, very slow to where they have to work their butt muscles essentially, you can actually put some lower leg shape in those sheep and goats through a treadmill. And again, I can kind of send Amber on a Word document a little bit of an exercise regimen, but just make sure that your sheep are doing something nearly every day. It's kind of like us. If we go, if we want to stay healthy and we want to be fit and we want to look like we work out, we have to work out every day and we have to do something every day. And so I guess I shouldn't say every day. What I'd encourage you to do is pick one day off for those sheep. Again, just like us, we have to have a rest day if we were to work out. And so, yeah, like I said, make sure those sheep are jogging. Again, what I would tell you is probably start them at a half mile and then work up to, we work up to about 2 miles a day. Okay, so good question about feed. So if you're raising your own lambs, what we do, we just had our group or our used lamb in February ourselves, and so we will start them on the Show Right NoCo lamb creep is what we start them on, the Show Right NoCo lamb creep, and so that's what I think is very, very important, is just making sure you're on a high quality show feed to make these sheep look correct. And so we start them on that creep, and then we bump them up to the lamb grower, the Show Right NoCo lamb grower. I'm a big believer in the Show Right feed. We've had a lot of success with it. Okay. I will also say that Show Tech is another really good feed as well, as far as the sheep and goat thing. Okay. What do you feed them if they're underweight? So good question. There's a couple different options that you can do. Again, I would encourage you, a high quality show feed makes a giant difference. I can't stress it enough that it makes a huge difference. And so then what I would do, if they're pretty thin, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you have a sheep that is just naturally little, but they're still in good condition, that gets kind of hard to tell you what to do there. But if they are thin and they need to put on more finish or fat, just weight in general, there's a supplement called Dine. It's actually what it is it's a puppy fattener. And Dine is incredibly high energy. It's 160 calories an ounce. And heck, actually, if you kids want to try something real sweet, Dine is very sweet. Tastes pretty good. But so Dine, again, that's very, very high energy. And so we drench sheep with Dine. And you can put it in their feed or give it to them through a drench gun. And I would probably say about 100 cc's a day is what you could do. And I would go with Dine towards the end, closer towards county fair. But that's what I would encourage. And then if you're still pretty severely underweight, what I would encourage you to do is maybe you might bump the corn levels in there. Any way that you can bump up the energy level of your feed, the better. But hopefully that answered your question. That's a good question. And if I didn't, again, kind of just chat there. Toward fair time, what would up the protein level? So question for you there, Timber. Are you asking what kind of supplements can you do to bump the protein level, or what protein level should they be at? So, just a second. So good question, Timber. Towards fair time, I like our protein to be up at around 17 to 18%. The show right feed that we feed is 18%. And so if you need to still up your protein level, which you shouldn't need to up it a whole lot past 18%, but if you need to up it just to get some added muscle shape, a great supplement that I full-heartedly believe in, it's called it's Purina on our show chows. It's called High Octane. It's their protein supplement. I love that stuff. It's the High Octane supplement line. And shoot, to be honest with you, I cannot remember off the top of my head what the protein is called. If it helps you, it's an orange bag, but or not an orange bag, an orange tub, if that helps. The tag is orange, but it's the High Octane protein supplement. So you can bump that up in their feed. Or also, if you need to bump protein up, another thing that I'm a very big fan of, Purina supplements are great. Purina also sells a protein supplement called Fitter 35, FITTER 35. That's another great supplement to boost your protein levels. And that can actually help you trim fat as well. If you got a sheep that you just can't work enough fat off of, then I would encourage you to feed some Fitter 35. When picking a lamb, which is more important, leg or top line? That's a good question. So that's kind of a hard question to answer as far as when picking a lamb, which is more important, leg or top line. What I would tell you is muscle is pretty important. And so make sure that they've got enough muscle. But as far as a balance standpoint, the attractiveness of their hind leg or keeping their top line right, ideally you do both. And I know that's kind of a cop-out answer there. But ideally you would have both of those things. But keeping their hind leg attractive and built correctly is pretty darn important. And for instance, like last year, my brother, we had a very good sheep that my family was pretty proud of. But that sheep wasn't sound enough structured. That sheep pulled up in his top line because he was too straight skeleton. And so that's what got us beat last year. And so making them structurally correct is very, very important. And so I hope that answered your question. If I didn't, send me another chat message, and hopefully I can answer it a little better. Any other questions? If not, that's about all the lecture that I have for you. And actually what I can do as well, I this is something that I live for. I love this game. I love the livestock game. And so Amber can share my phone number with you, or if you have a pen and a piece of paper, my phone number, I can give you my phone number, and feel free to text me, call me whenever with any kind of questions. Next year,
Colby, you were muted. You're muted for a second there, Colby. Sorry. Right at number. My number. You missed that. Sorry.
okay, there we go. And so I can give you guys my phone number. Feel free to text me, call me whenever. I love helping and I love answering questions. If you guys need show sheep next year, I'll have some show sheep to sell. But so my phone number is 307-760-1315. And again, I love helping, and so I'm an open book. If you guys ever have any questions, or if you're, let's say you're at the Casper College sale, I will be at the Casper College sale. Give me a call, and I'd love to help you pick out a sheep. Love to help you pick out a goat. So, yeah, whenever. I got a couple questions here. Somebody said we may go to the Casper sale. I'd love to help you pick out a sheep. I know I've looked at a couple sheep that are going to be at that sale, and they look really good. And so,
Somebody
There's-
asked when the sale was in Casper.
when is it? Oh, dude, yeah, when is it? Look at that. April 7th is the date of that sale. Let me double check that real fast, but yep. April 7th is the date of that sale.
What's different? What's different about a show feed? What's it have in it different than a grower fattening ration for a lamb?
The main difference between them is those show rations are balanced. I guess I shouldn't say a feedlot ration isn't balanced, but the main reason is, one, ingredients are just a shot higher quality, and then two, their vitamin and mineral packages are just a shot again higher quality and just a shot better. And what it does is it's a lot better at putting in some muscle shape in those sheep. Once again, just because there's more ingredients than just the typical fattening growing ration, if that makes sense. What do you do when they want to eat more, when they won't eat enough? Okay, so great question as far as appetite here. What do you do to make them want to eat more when they won't eat enough? Okay, that's a fight that, heck, we still fight every day. So for one, exercise will help with appetite. It's just like us. As soon as we get to working out, the first thing, if you guys ever do a hard workout, as soon as you're done, you really, really, really want to eat. And so exercise is very, very important. Another thing that I will tell you, making sure that you're up to date on worming those sheep is so important. And then the other thing that I will tell you is there's a product called ProBias. It's not very expensive. We ProBias our sheep every 2 weeks. And so ProBias is so important because it keeps their gut in check. It's live probiotics is what it is, and it keeps their gut, the microbial environment correct in those sheep. And then when your lamb is inactive, what do you do? Hearts iPad, what do you mean by inactive? I'll go on from that really quick. Oh, great question about how do you spell ProBias. Just sent that. I think that's how you spell ProBias. I just know what the tag looks like. And then, should the lambs be on a creep right now? Little sweet feed wouldn't be bad. That's fine. I mean, you're giving them energy. We have our sheep on creep now, on a creep feed. Our baby lambs that we just got, we haven't bought any more sheep yet this year, but our baby lambs that we raise, those sheep are on creep feed right now. It just gives them a boost start, which helps them a whole bunch. It's very high energy. And so when do we start our babies on creep feed? So these baby lambs, they are that we raise, we usually start them on creep feed at about a week old, honestly, and we just let them kind of nibble at it whenever they want, and eventually they'll kind of take to it at their own time. And so if you let them kind of take to it, if it's always in front of their face when they're little, then they'll know, they can kind of take to it at their own pace and at their own speed, and that way they let their gut adjust to being a ruminant animal. Before they start eating feed, they're not necessarily a ruminant just yet. It's called being a pre-ruminant, and so that you have to let their gut kind of adjust. But that's a good question on when you start babies on creep. How often do you recommend worming? I would recommend worming. We try to worm about every 2 months is what we try to do, every month to 2 months. And I know that's a broad range of time. If you have the availability to do it every month, I think it's incredibly smart to do. It only helps you and it's a relative. It's cheap insurance, is what it is. What wormer do I recommend? We get the sheep Ivomec. It's a paste form. The lamb Ivomec. When do you first worm the lambs? We give them a wormer shot when they're babies. It's in our 7-way shot that we use, and then the other shot that we we will first give them that paste wormer at about a month old. About a month old is when we'll give them the first paste. Any other questions? Well, in that case, if there isn't any more, again, feel free to text me. Yes, Safeguard is fine. We've used Safeguard too. I've never had any problems with it. So, yeah, I would imagine Safeguard's fine. You just need to adjust your dose for those lambs, obviously. But well, excellent. If there's there we go. Oh, you're welcome. Again, feel free to text me. But that is all I've got as far as lecture material. So. Oh, shoot. You know what? I guess before I let you all go, that's a question that I should have gone over a long time ago. The recommended amount of feed. So we always start our sheep out at right about 2 pounds a day. And then we eventually get them up to be about 4 pounds a day is what we end up getting them at when we're close to county fair. And we usually only bump them up about 1/4 pound every 2 weeks or so. I would have to make sure the math works out right. We kind of feed by visual, but if you can start them out at 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds a day and then work them up to be about 4 pounds by the time county fair rolls around, then you should be just about right as far as, and that's our experience with Show Right. This is a game where in this game that we call Showing Livestock, there's so much trial and error that goes on. I encourage you you'll kind of learn to go by visual. If you've got a sheep that's getting too fat, probably want to up the exercise. And that's something that I would encourage you all to do as well. If you've got a sheep that's starting to get a little too fat, don't decrease feed. Don't decrease feed because that's how you turn sheep stale. They start to become stale. Increase your exercise. If they become fat, you need to increase your exercise. Leave feed the same. If you've got a sheep that's too thin, start bumping your feed. That's when you can start bumping your feed up and start pushing them a little harder, okay? If they've got the appetite, let them have it. Excellent question. Why dock tails? That was at the beginning of the lecture. I forgot about that question. So why dock tails? So that's from a health reason. We dock tails for a health reason because sheep don't actually have muscle in their tail like cattle do, let's say. And so sheep actually can't lift their tail in order to go to the bathroom, for a lack of a better term, I guess. And so what that does is it actually that manure starts to cake onto their tail, and then it starts to block up that whole manure process. And so we dock tails for that purpose from a health standpoint. And then in the show sheep deal, we dock tails just a shot shorter than what commercial sheep do. And this is kind of an argument that I get a little passionate on here, so forgive me. But the argument that docking tails short causes prolapsing, that's fairly inaccurate. You have to dock tails incredibly short in order to cause prolapsing just from docking. The primary purpose we do them short in the show ring is just because you can make their hip look so much better. It makes their hip look leveler. And so that's the primary purpose we do it in the club lamb deal, just a shot shorter than we do in the commercial sheep industry. But docking is primarily for health reasons. What do you recommend for show length? To be honest with you, when we band tails, we get as far up on the tail as we possibly can. We go right up to the base of their tail underneath, and then we kind of start to tilt the bander forward. We try to get them about as short as we can, because in order to get them too short to the point where they prolapse because their tail is too short, that honestly requires surgery. You would actually have to go, or you actually end up going in and removing a vertebrae in order for that to happen. But yeah, I wouldn't worry about getting it too short. It is very, very hard, especially if you band, or especially if you dock with a bander. It is very hard to get it too short. I'm sure there's guys that can do it, but I have had a very hard time getting it with the bander. And actually, when we band sheep, we actually put 3 bands on. We get the first one on as far as we can, and then we just try to beat it each time. But any other questions? Excellent. And again, feel free to text me.
All right, you guys had lots of good questions tonight, so I'm glad we were able to pick Colby's brain. I'm sure, like he said, he'll send us that information and we'll get that sent out to you so that you can contact him again or get that stuff he was going to send. So I'll email that recording plus all that information out to everyone. So if there's no more questions, it looks like we just have a couple questions, a little texting questions, kind of see what everybody learned and then we'll be done. So how did you like tonight's format? So texting that way we did before. Tell us if you think this is really awesome, do more things like this, put in an A. B, if it was okay, and C, I didn't like it. I'd rather do something face-to-face.
So good question on ProBias here while you guys are filling this out. We usually start ProBiasing sheep. We will ProBias those guys right at about a month old is when we give them their first dose of ProBias. The nice part about ProBias is you cannot overdose ProBias. I wouldn't try, obviously, but yeah, I would start ProBias about then, at about a month old.
All right. You guys have lots of good questions. Lots of first timers tonight, so hopefully they've learned a lot. So
Good.
What is one thing that you will share with others that you learned tonight? So again, you can just type in a statement, sentence, a couple words. Worming and ProBias. Muscle and shape of a lamb. What a good skeletal structure looks like. Jogging your lambs. Structure diagram. The feed recommendations and when to get lambs started on feeds. Good. Then making sure you can pick out your lamb and goat to focus on structure. All of it's very helpful. All right. One last question and then we're done, maybe. There we go. How will you take the information you gained tonight and apply it to your 4-H market animal project? How will you take the information you gained tonight and apply it to your 4-H market animal project? Feeding, make a schedule of worming, exercise, and feed to keep on schedule. Very good. All right. So if you guys don't have any last questions for Colby, just looks like we have a chat here. Let's see. Use the feed regimen on the lambs being raised and focus on proper workout for them. Very good. All right. Well, thank you guys for jumping on. I hope everybody's learned some good information to be able to take and apply it to your sheep and goat projects. I will send out this recording. If you have questions, we'll get that information from Colby in the next couple of days, and I'll get this stuff emailed out to you. If you don't have any other questions, then thank you, and hope everybody has a great night.
Thanks, everybody, for logging in. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Colby, for taking time out of your night in Houston to be with us.
Not a problem. Glad to.